Welcome everyone. Please wait with us a few moments while we give a few more folks a chance to sign in, and we'll get started soon. All right, welcome to today's monthly technical assistance call. We'll just get started with a few logistics. Please know that all attendees are muted for the majority of the webinar, but there will be opportunities to participate in discussion. At that point, you will be prompted to raise your hand. You can see the icons there that give a little bit of guidance on how to do that. And you will be unmuted and remuted by an organizer at that point. You can also submit questions for speakers by entering your questions in the drop-down control panel. We also would like to read a recording notice for you, since this call is being supported by American Institutes for Research. The American Institutes for Research allows for the recording of audio, visuals, participants, and other information sent, verbalized, or utilized during business-related meetings. By joining a meeting, you automatically consent to such recordings. Any participant who prefers to participate via audio only should disable their video camera, so only their audio will be captured. Video and/or audio recordings of any AIR session shall not be transmitted to an external third party without their permission. So the video camera may not be relevant for most individuals here, but that's good to keep in mind if you share anything in the questions box or if you raise your hand to speak. So thank you, and now I will turn it over to Matthew Schneer.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think most of you probably know me by now, but my name is Matthew Schneer. I'm Associate Division Director in MSIP, and it is my pleasure on behalf of Greg Core and the rest of our division to welcome you to this month's National TA Call. This is officially our National DMS TA Call, but as you'll see on the agenda, we have a number of different items that we'll be discussing today. Greg is unable to join us, so he asked me to welcome you all today. In a moment, I'm going to hand it over to David, but I wanted to just note a couple of things first. Most importantly, as you know, we are busily working on your annual performance reports and our final response to them, and then moving into determinations. In our next National TA Call coming up in June, I think it's June 10th if I have the date right, we will be discussing determinations at that time, so look forward to that moving ahead. As you see on the agenda today, we have several different topics. I am going to be, after David gives us some remarks, I will be providing an update on allocations with some important information for both Part B and Part C. After that, Kate Moran will be walking us through the DMS protocol templates that we are using. Wanted to let you know just quickly here, and Kate may mention it more, that we are close to finalizing the protocols for integrated monitoring and for sustaining compliance and improvement. But we're finalizing them based on some feedback we got through some focus groups that Kate will be discussing further. But we wanted to take the opportunity today to just give you some general information about how the protocols works as a precursor for that. Following that discussion, Diana Yu will be showing you a new website with tremendous communication possibilities and potential, and just giving you an overview of that. And we will, in terms of questions, we discussed this just before we started, we're going to pause in between the protocol template portion and the engage OSEP portion to take some questions at that time, and then we'll move into the rest of the presentation and take any remaining questions at the end of the session, depending upon time. So with that, let me hand it over to David for his remarks. David?
Sure. Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to take a few moments to chat with you. I know it's been a few months actually since I've spoken to you since I took over as the acting director. First, I wanted to say thank you for your continued leadership and your engagement to support infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities throughout the nation. I continue to be amazed and impressed at the amount of work and the diligence and dedication of all of you. So you may be wondering, at what point will OSEP have political leadership? The only update I can give you at this time that I'm still serving in the role as the acting OSEP director. Additionally, I'm serving in the role as the acting assistant secretary for OSERs delegated to perform those duties. Please rest assured that we're continuing to work with the new political leadership. Actually, I have a meeting with Secretary Cardona tomorrow to talk about some activities gearing up for the new school year. But until which time we do have political leadership, please rest assured that our leadership team and OSEP, we're continuing to be responsive to your suggestions for improvement and to provide the robust technical assistance we know that you need at this time. You know, when I think about the last year and a half, it's certainly been a challenging time for all of us. But I think we can say there is a little light on the horizon, and I'm looking forward to what next school year 21-22, has in store for all of us. It's also an exciting time with the ARP, American Rescue Plan Supplemental IDA funds that you're all aware of. Today, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about those as well. It's really exciting time for us to receive this additional funds, and I'm looking forward to our FY22 budget, which we're looking forward to receiving within the next week as well. The other thing I do want to say that if you have any suggestions for improvement or even feedback regarding our DMS 2.0 pivot, which, as you know, we've engaged in since January, please, we're interested to know what's working well, what are areas of improvement, and if you have any suggestions for next year as well, please don't hesitate to let us know how we can improve our customer service for each of you. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Matt and enjoy the rest of the hour. Thank you, everyone, once again.
Matt, this is Kate. Just before you get started, we did have a question about closed captioning, so I don't want to get too far into the call. I believe there is a link for folks to access the live closed captioning. So Blythe, if you could put that in the chat, and turning it over to you, Matt. Thank you. You're muted. You'll just want to unmute.
It would be good if I turned on my microphone. Sorry for that. I know we have all been experiencing that many times. So thanks, Kate, for catching that, and thank you, David, for your update and your leadership as we wait for political leadership. We really appreciate all the support that you've been providing to us and to our grantees. So Blythe, we can move on to the next slide, please. Wanted to start by giving you an update on allocations, and I know you all have been waiting patiently, sometimes maybe not so patiently. Looks like we're getting a little delay on the slides, but I'm sure it will come up shortly. But what I wanted to let you know is what we've been dealing with since the passage of the American Recovery Plan is as most of you know, the provisions for the supplementary IDA funds were added at the very last minute to that act, and we think it's an exciting opportunity. However, because it was added in the very last moment, there have been a number of technical and legal issues that we've had to sort through. And the good news is, after a few months of discussions within ED, with OMB, and with the Treasury, we have sorted through all that needs to be sorted through. And what we anticipate is, and Blythe, just checking if you're going to be able to move the slides, because I'm still on the agenda, but I'll keep rolling and as we move forward. what we anticipate at this point is that we will be able to send out revised allocation tables for Part B and C within the next few days. And these allocation tables will include total amounts for both the regular IDA FFY 2021 funds and the ARP Act IDA supplementary funds. There'll be separate columns for both of those sets of funds, as well as a total amount that shows your full allocation. For the Part C programs, looks like Blythe is having a little bit of technical difficulties, but again, I'll continue rolling through it as she gets us up to speed here. For the Part C programs, one thing that I want to alert you to is that when you get the tables, you may notice that there is a slight increase in the totals for the FFY 2021 regular IDA funds, and a slight decrease in the ARP supplementary funds. This was due to some shifts made for how we are, great, here we go, for how we are reserving the amounts for the state incentive grant or the extended Part C option. The overall total combined amount for each state, combining both the regular IDA funds and the ARP funds, will be the same, but you'll see slight differences in that. Also wanted you to know that the ARP IDA funds will go out under a separate GAN, and there will be a separate what we call CFDA alpha. So it will be 84.027A and 84.027B, if I've got my numbers right, or something along those lines. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, for Part C, there is some very specific information that you will be getting by email, but I want to highlight it here. Because the ARP IDA funds will be under a separate GAN, and there are shifts in the formula grant amounts, all Part C states will be required to submit to the email address that you sent your application to, that's listed here, two things: a revised Section 3 or use of funds section for the FFY 2021 IDA funds, that is the regular funds that you receive, and an additional, a second Section 3 for the ARP Act IDA funds. Because this is not an eligibility portion of the application, you do not need to obtain a new signature for the revised Section 3, although you will need to send in the Section 3. Also note that for those states that are applying for the SIG grant for the extended Part C option, you should work with your states on additional Section 3 requirements. I won't get into that because that only affects a few states here. We will be sending an email, as I said, to Part C states next week, or maybe, and then with specific instructions regarding the revised Section 3 forms. Please do not resend the Section 3 forms until you receive the revised allocations. I also want to note that because you are revising your use of funds forms, that does not mean you need to redo public participation. As long as you completed the public participation on the application already, you are good to go with that. So we know that this is an added burden. We apologize for the late date with which we're notifying you of this, but as I said, this was challenging for us to work out all of the legal details and then the technical details on what needs to go. Obviously, we will be as flexible as we can regarding how to do this and the timing of it. And if you have questions, please do reach out to your state leads on that. And we can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, for Part B, because of the way the formula works under IDA, the additional funds, the supplementary ARP funds, do not in fact increase the amount of funds that Part B states may reserve for state level activities. All of the additional funds get flowed down to your LEAs. As a result, there is no need to send in a revised interactive spreadsheet. I guess that's the somewhat good news from that silver lining from the other portion of that. Okay, and then we can go on to the next slide, please. So some questions about the period of availability. And let me just state, and I should have said this up front, we've said this before, but I want to emphasize this. In terms of the requirements applying to the ARP IDA funds, all of the same requirements apply as under IDA. We expect to be issuing a fact sheet shortly. It's trying to get through final clearance, which will go through some of this for you. But in general, all the requirements under IDA apply to ARP. And that includes that the ARP funds will have the same period of availability as the regular IDA FFY 2021 fund. So as a reminder, that means that both the IDA FFY 2021 funds and the ARP IDA funds will have to be obligated by September 30th, 2023. I do want to note that under the revisions that were made, I think last summer, to the uniform guidance, the liquidation period is now 120 days for states instead of 90 days for states after the obligation period ends. So that means that for these set of funds, they must be liquidated by January 28th, 2024. I should note for Part B purposes that this additional number of days does not apply to the sub-grantees, it applies to the grantee. So your LEAs still have to liquidate within the 90-day period. I know a number of states have been asking about whether there was any possibility of us being able to provide the flexibility for waivers for the period of availability for the 2019 funds, much like we had been able to do for Part B states, as well as for Part C states that are ed leads for the 2018 funds. And we have worked as hard as we can to learn to see if there was any flexibility around there. Unfortunately, the CARES Act, which provided us the original flexibility to allow for those waivers for their FFY 2018 funds, does not apply to the FFY 2019 funds. So we do not have the authority to extend waivers for the period of obligation absent that authority that was granted in the CARES Act. So at this point, we do not have the ability to grant waivers for the period of availability for 2019 funds. And I think with that, those are the updates I wanted to provide regarding allocations. As I mentioned, after Kate gets through her section on the protocol templates, we will pause to take some questions at that time, and happy to try to address any questions that I can about the allocations at that time. Thank you, and I'll hand it over to Kate.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you for our patience with some technology things that we have going on. I see there is a request for the copy of the PowerPoint to follow along with. So Diana, I'm not sure if you're able to email a PDF to folks, or Blythe, if you could get that in the chat, but I do know Blythe was having some technical issues. So again, typically we would post that for you all to be able to follow along. So I'll just send that to my colleagues, and hopefully as I move through the next couple of slides, folks can be working on that. We wanted to spend a little time this month talking through the organization of our protocol templates, so that next month, when we are ready to roll out the content of the integrated monitoring and sustaining compliance and improvement protocols, we would be able to spend a lot of time really talking about the content as opposed to talking about the organization of our protocols. We want to highlight that each of our monitoring protocols do have a common organization to them. They're designed to help OSEP gather what we need for our monitoring. But again, they may be useful to states in your assessment of your state system. So some of the areas and feedback that we've already received is some questions about some of the components. And I'm going to talk about why those are included. And that, again, will speak to, these are our monitoring protocols. So they're what we are using as OSEP. And some of the areas that we have included on our new protocols are to better understand the particular questions, and then also highlight some areas or issues of concern that might require some follow-up on OSEP's part. And we're hoping that through that procedure, they will both be informative to you as states, but also in our own internal processes. So just keeping that as in mind as we go through these slides. We're highlighting here that there is an overview on each one of the protocols that will talk about. These protocols are set up because as SEAs and as state lead agencies under both Part B and Part C, there is this requirement for general supervision over the programs that you work with. And so we've included here those hyperlinks to those specific regulations, specifically highlighting the 303.700 and 300.600. So you can look into that a little bit more, but again, these are all included on the protocol template, so it'll be available for you all there. These monitoring protocols are a framework that we're utilizing to investigate the particular statutory and regulatory requirements that we at OSEP and MSIP specifically have an obligation to ensure being carried out at the state level. So they're not intended as questionnaires, and they won't be followed step by step. They will be based on state-specific circumstances. So some of the questions that you see within a protocol, all of them may not be asked. It's really going to be dictated through areas or components that we want to dive a little deeper into. It's also going to be dictated by the conversations that we are having with our states. And so some of the questions and possible follow-up questions or different areas of the protocol may be asked in a different way across all of our states. So all of that is to say that each one of these is not going to be a rote recitation of these protocols, but we're providing them as a guide that will inform our discussions with you, the state. And OSEP will use this information to determine how a state is implementing the IDA requirements, and we may provide additional technical assistance or support based on the information that we're hearing through the review of these protocols. And today we wanted to highlight, again, we're still in the overview part. We've included the 3 phases of our monitoring work. So again, we have 5 cohorts of states. Each state will be engaged in 3 phases of monitoring. So year 1, phase 1 is pre-site work. Year 2 is on-site or virtual, depending on where we are with travel. And then year 3 would be follow-up on anything that was identified throughout any of the years that might be outstanding to a finding or remaining evidence that we're looking at, or things that need to be closed out. So in that pre-site work, it's going to include OSEP and you, the state, engaging together in review of these protocols. OSEP will be conducting some information prior to talking to you, pulling down information from your websites, pulling down information from the SPP APR, looking at your grants, and then following up with these targeted interviews to ensure and verify our understanding of what we've read and what we've seen. That may include, and we're going to talk about this again, we've talked about it on a couple of calls throughout, but some evidence that we might be looking at during that phase 1 activity. And then again in year 2, there might be additional evidence pieces that we're going to look at that really get at the implementation of some of these protocol components that we're looking at throughout this general supervision investigation of your state system that ultimately gets put into a beautiful puzzle that creates our understanding of your state's general supervision system. So suggested documents or review is at the top of each of our protocols. There will be a listing of documents that we think will be assistive in our understanding of what your state is carrying out related to a particular DMS component. So we don't want to create a huge burden for you as the state. We're working to limit, as you can see here, the volume of documents. For phase 1, OSEP is not asking for anything that would have PII on it. There may be limited circumstances in phase 2 where we might need to look at some implementation level documents. But at the phase 1, the year 1 activities, we're really looking at policies, procedures, and maybe some other monitoring type reports that would give us a good understanding of what your system is set up in a particular area. But in the top of each of our protocols, there will be a list that says documents, suggested documents to review. So when we post these protocols, those would be something you'd want to look at and identify those pieces so that you'd have them readily available to provide to OSEP should that be requested. Each protocol begins with an overarching question on the monitoring component and then is followed up by sub-questions that you'll see at the top of each of the protocols. So we are including, as I've included here, the link to our DMS framework and definition. That will be included on each of the protocols at the top, followed by these overarching questions that are related to the monitoring component. Those questions are followed by general information about what the question is asking about. Some of them are the pertinent regulations. We will link to the actual regulation right at that overarching question. But then following that will be general expectations and information about the particular component or area. This section will help you understand what the question is investigating and what the question is looking to further understand about that particular area. We would follow that with a listing of possible follow-up questions. And I want to highlight that word possible. Some of the feedback we saw was concern about the amount of questions that are in that possible follow-up area. And I want to be clear that all of those questions may not be asked. Some of the questions OSEP may be able to look at and understand based on your overview of a particular question. Some may not be necessary or relevant to your state. So they are possible follow-up questions. They are not things that we would be looking for answers to all of them, but we want to provide them because it helps us as we're following down a certain conversation path. It will help us to work with you, the state, and ensure that we're asking the right questions to understand the particular component. The possible follow-up questions are then followed by areas or issues for follow-up. And these areas or issues could be things that result in findings of noncompliance if verified to be true. They could just be a concern about a process or procedure that might not be in place. And it could be an area that suggests a need for technical assistance or further discussion. So I think when you look at those areas or issues for follow-up, it should be a conversation of, what does our system have or doesn't have in relation to this? Do we need to investigate this a little further? Is this something we want to reach out to OSEP for further technical assistance on? And again, it may lead to a finding, or it may just be something that when layered with other pieces leads to a finding. A lot of the components within those areas or issues for follow-up are based on information we've seen and findings made on other DMS and monitoring visits in the past. So they are things that we want to highlight for states so that states are aware and have the information ahead of time to be able to clarify, verify, and perhaps fix some of the components within those areas or issues for follow-up. We also wanted to highlight today that we are actively engaged in some feedback sessions with both our Part B and Part C stakeholders involved in cohort 1 and then beyond. DAISY, ECTA, IDC, and NCSI are all coordinating some feedback sessions as we roll out each one of these protocols. So the first 2 were on the integrated monitoring and sustaining compliance. The Part B, NCSI engaged in 3 focus sessions, and there were 40 states that attended those meetings. And then ECTA and DAISY held commensurate Part C focus groups, and those, my notes are covered up. So those were engaged, I believe, in cohort 1 and a couple and beyond that. But if you are interested in participating in some of these future feedback sessions, please reach out to your Part B and Part C TA centers to investigate participating in some of these focus groups that they have set up. And we're just going to continue to work with our TA centers to engage in any future opportunities for you all, the states and our stakeholders, to provide input and additional information on the protocols that we are placing out. All right, so before I go to the next slide, I'm going to pull up our questions because I know there were quite a few that were coming in as I was talking. And I think we will start. So Matt, if you want to come off of mute and let me go back up. I know there was quite a few related to the ARP funds.
Yep.
So will the ARP funds be considered an increase in the IDA awards, allowing the MOE reduction of 50% of an increase in funding?
Yes, much like under ARA, it will operate in a similar manner. Pay attention to the requirements for the LEAs that are able to reduce MOE, including meeting requirements, not having significant discrepancies. And we will be monitoring that. We want to make sure that that is being addressed appropriately. One thing to note is that with the ARA funds, there were some OIG findings, Office of Inspector General funds, that states were not monitoring and tracking the use of those funds. Those funds are meant to be, are freed up for use of allowable activities under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So that's pretty broad. Sorry, I got muted. Sure how. Apologize
yeah,
for that.
I did too. I don't know what happened.
But anyway, what I was saying is that there is an obligation for states to monitor and track those funds that when they get freed up through that process. So, but the answer is yes.
Okay. When is the Part C Section 3 ARP section due? How do we determine allocations without stakeholder input, which can't be attained without the final allocations?
Yeah, so I'm going to ask that you be a little bit patient as we put together the email. I'm hope that we'll be going out with this. I'm hopeful that it will address some of those questions about how to do that. I think we're going to be as flexible as possible as far as the due date, but I think the thought is that you can, I mean, in terms of the stakeholder input, I think we'll hopefully address that through that. But for now, what I want to emphasize is that there is not a requirement for public participation.
The other question is, can you one more time review the Part C ARP funds when they need to be liquidated? Did you go over that
Sure.
date? Go back.
Sure. So period of availability for the ARP funds, whether B or C, will be the same as for all FFY 2021 funds. These will be made available starting July 1, and they must be obligated by September 30th, 2023, and then they must be liquidated at the state level by January 28th, 2024.
All right. Then we have a question about the Part B 619 funds. Will those be coming to the state? Are they going directly to the Part B programs? I understand school age ARP funds will go directly to the LEA. Thanks.
Well, the funds go out in a grant to the states, but they will have to be flowed through to the LEAs. There are no additional funds that may be reserved at the state level. So the 619 and 611 funds will go out as sub-grants once you get them as grants.
Okay. The next one is, do we need to identify exactly what a state will spend the ARP funds in Section 3? What if we do not yet have an exact plan laid out?
I think we'll have a little bit more information and guidance for you shortly, but I think at this point you should expect to do the best you can, the best description based on the information you have from there, and work with your state lead if you have further questions.
Okay, let me see. I'm going to keep, there is a protocol question, but I'm going to keep with the ARP funds and then go to that one. So the next one is, so that we may continue engaging in thoughtful family and stakeholder engagement about the ARP funds, will we be given time between receiving the updated allocation letters and the date the ARP Section 3 will be due? I think you've answered this, but probably reiterating that might be helpful.
Yeah, I don't know that we have a hard date at this point. Just please refer to the email when we send it out and any additional guidance that we have that time.
And the next one is, do ARP funds need to be applied to CEIS?
Yes, again, all of the same requirements for ARP apply as for regular IDA. This will be addressed in the fact sheet and further guidance on how you do things like required CIS or proportionate share. If you were around during the era, it will be the same way that it was done at that time, but look for further guidance from us.
So I'm assuming this next question is along those same lines. It says, does an LEA found with significant disproportionality need to set aside 15% of the ARP funds along with regular CIS?
Yes.
Okay. Where can they find guidance on the ARP funds?
Again, we are trying to get final clearance on a fact sheet that will provide some preliminary guidance on the IDA ARP funds, and then we are working on a augmented guidance document that will take a little bit longer to come through. I also just want to note for those of you that are not aware that the ESSER use of funds guidance was just issued yesterday, and really important to note that there is a broad ability to use those ESSER ARP funds for the purposes of Part B, as well as in some instances for Part C. And there's a big section in there that talks about how to use these funds for students with disabilities. So I urge you to take a look at that as well.
There was a question about public participation in relation to these funds. Can you clarify again what you were saying around the need for public participation or lack thereof?
So what we're saying is, as you know, there is a requirement, public participation requirement for your applications, that you have to have them out for public participation for 60 days. We are not requiring that you redo that. The 60 days that you already engaged in is sufficient for those purposes. I know there have been some questions about stakeholder engagement regarding the use of the ARP funds, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to address that in the future.
Great. Let me see. May states make adjustments on use of funds on the resubmitted Section 3 for regular FFY 2021 allocations, or only adjusted amounts that reflect received allocations?
I believe you can make the adjustments that you would like to make.
Okay. Let's see. Since LEAs can choose which FFY of the funds they apply the 15% for CAIS, can they use the FFY 20 funds instead of the FFY 21?
Yeah, I'd like to say that that's getting it pretty far in the weeds, and I know
Okay.
we have another section, so we'll provide additional TA on that moving forward. Thank you.
All right. So a couple of questions that I will address. One, that we will, when I finish this part, I'm going to get the PDF of the presentation. I will post that in the chat. Once Diana is sharing her screen, I'll be able to do some maneuvering on the backside. So please stand by for that. The other question related to the protocols was about, let me go back up. All right, so the timeline of each year of the monitoring phases. So each phase is a full year. So we will have different components. We shared that on previous calls, and we'll share an updated version of it as we get closer to October. But it would begin in October, like October to November would be a particular component, November to December. We have some breaks in the year based on different busy times for states and things like that. But it would go from October through August. Then you would begin prepping for phase 2 activities that again would be carried out between October and that following August. What that specific on-site or virtual visit will ensue. We'll be talking a little bit more about that as we get closer to phase 2 for states. We'll be providing you much more specific information about what that calendar year will look like for you. And then the third year would be about that correction. So again, it would be from the October to August time period that you would be working with your state lead on closing out any findings, working on evidence, figuring out a timeline if it needs to go beyond that last year, if you have like a state statute. Excuse me. So hopefully that answers. Sorry, Matt.
Oh, Kate, I hope you are recovering there. But yes, I think that answers, hopefully that answers your question there. Kate, did we have further questions for you? Okay, so we will hand it off to Diana for the final section of today's webinar. Thank you so much for everybody.
We can see you, Diana. We just need your screen share. There we go. You're muted. Yep, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Are you able to see the Ideas That Work screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for participating on this afternoon's National TA Call, and thanks so much to Kate and Matt for allowing me to squeeze a little time to preview the OSEP Engage space. I think Greg had sent an email a couple weeks ago soliciting your request to add people to the OSEP Engage site, and up to date, we had only included one person per state on our listservs. And so we tried to find a solution to expand that reach, because sometimes we had been receiving requests, can you add this person? The data manager really needs to hear this. Can you add my assistant? So forth and so on. So we've been working with Blythe and team, who is helping us with this call, to configure the Engage OSEP site. So how you get to it is, first you go to our program page on the Ideas That Work site, and you'll notice that this final button is now called the Engage OSEP site. It used to be called the Collaboration Space, and some of you, especially Part C coordinators and 619 staff, may be familiar with the Collaboration Space, but now it's called Engage OSEP. So when you click there, you'll come to this site, and you'll notice that it has these pretty gears and it says engage OSEP. So it's a part of the OSEP Ideas That Work site, but this is a place for communication and collaboration. And so once you log in, you'll notice that there are some standing items here. In addition to, in this middle part, you'll see congratulations on your first login, now what? And there are mini video vignettes. And then the next section of the page is customized to you depending on how many groups you're a part of. So you may see some standing items that go for everyone, and then some items that are specific to you. Additionally, you'll see our Twitter feed here, and as you scroll further down, you can see another view of your activities. So how many groups you may be part of, if you bookmark any items, or if you post anything, all of that content can be managed here. So if you go to our MSIP page in particular, you'll land here and you'll have a little brief intro, and you'll notice that there is content organized in 4 areas. And these we couldn't customize the names of, and so there'll be a key here that notes what these types of content lead to. But discussions are just that, discussions. Events would showcase events such as today's National TA Call. Resources would be emails that are sent from Greg or David or others from our office. And so this would get to that request of having additional people from your state staff included on our distributions. This would help us to, this would be a solution to help us to have a broader reach in our communications. And last, there's a wiki page, and we use this to organize content in our main process areas, APRs, grants, DMS, and so forth and so on. So I will show you a little bit more of that content. So for example, I mentioned that events are, or webinars are organized by these, and you'll notice that the content is organized by these little pictures, and you can sort the content by that way as well. So if you wanted to sort by events, and I applied that, then you would see any post related to our national TA calls. If you wanted to see any emails that were recently issued from our office, you can sort by resources, and you'll notice that the most recent email that went out about the OSEP Leadership and Project Directors Conference registration is up at the top. We also sent information about the regular IDA Part B and C allocations, and so you'll get an easy, in chronological order, easy to access way to go review those emails that have been issued from our office. And then wikis, as I mentioned, are organized by our content areas. But in addition, if you actually click on one such as the grants, you'll see a cross post of all of the emails that have been attributed to this area in particular. So we've sent a lot of emails about grants in particular, the supplemental IDA funds, the Part C extended option, and the Part B and C allocations. So if you click on that information, if I clicked on the Part C extended options, for example, you'll see the exact email that Greg sent that only went to Part C coordinators. And so if you click on this email, if you're a data manager or anyone else on the state staff, you'll be able to review the exact content that was issued via email. Going back to our main page, you'll also notice that some of these features you can post comments on, some you may not, and also you can bookmark some of the content as well. And so when you get in there, you'll notice that you can engage with the content in many ways. But I'm going to expand this to show you all of the content. And so as you see, it's kind of in a synchronized format, just the most recent post being at the very top. Discussions are where, similar to if you have used our Grads 360 site to post discussions before, you can utilize that function in a similar format. I do want to note that for discussions, OSEP will not be monitoring this website on the discussions piece in particular on a regular regular basis. So if you need our attention, you should really reach out to your state contact, or excuse me, state lead or the customer service representative. This is more for cross collaboration and discussion. So discussions would be used in that format. And of course, anything that should be in the Federal Register that is an information collection will be posted in that format. So this tool would not skirt those responsibilities that we have as well. The last piece that I did want to show you on the site was that you also have a way to look at this by events. And so if you click on it, it shows you events that are attributed to you by group in a calendar format. So for instance, you can see today's monthly TA call notice here. And if you clicked on this, it would take you to the registration email that was issued and also cross-posted to the OSEP Ideas That Work site. So basically, the Engage OSEP site is a way to really better communicate with you and also organize content that had been historically sent via email or had been posted in several different ways. And so it's another way to access the content. And then finally, the best feature is that you get email notifications when new content is posted. So for instance, this one shows the registration for the OSEP Leadership Conference that I had mentioned previously, and it posted it pretty immediately. And so immediately I got an email ping saying there's a new resource posted, so you can click on it and go to that posting. And you can go in and establish the frequency of the notification settings. So if you want that immediate notification, you can set it at immediate, or if you want a weekly digest, you can set up the frequency at your leisure. So I know that was really brief and quick, but we did want to let you know that we have submitted all of the emails that have been emailed to me as of last week. So sometime this week or so, or maybe early next week, since we have a holiday, you will have access to the site, and then I will send you an email to confirm that your login has been activated.
We do have a couple. Yeah,
Sure.
we have some questions, Diana, for you. So that was the first question is, how do I register for this site? So it sounds like those that are already in our system will be automatically registered. And then
That's a great question. So if you're already part of our distribution list, you're already registered, and several state directors and Part C coordinators had emailed me a list of additional staff, and so I've logged those in. But if you didn't get a chance to do that, there's still an opportunity. We will continue to update registration on a monthly basis. So if you want to email me, my email is diana, diana.yu@ed.gov, and maybe we can put it in the chat as well. You can email me those requests, and on a monthly basis, we can add people if you submit that to me. Thank you.
all right. And the next question was, will OSEP TA Center staff get access to this site?
Yes, that's a great question. I think Greg sent a separate email to TA Center staff, and similarly, we had only included the executive director or just kind of the one project director to date, but we are expanding our reach. And so similarly, please just send me an email and let me know which additional staff members you would like to be included from your centers, and we'd be happy to include them.
Great. Any other questions for Diana? You can raise your hands. I can try to figure that out. I think we have some assistance on the back end. It looks like the PDF is finally posted. We again apologize. There was technical issues on the back end, so we were furiously trying to get things up for you all and available. The other thing I did want that there was a question about was the link to where the DMS protocols are posted, and those are on our sites.ida.gov site, and it's under resources for grantees, but I put the direct link there. As the protocols are finalized, they will be posted there. And our goal is that all of the protocols that will be utilized in phase 1 will be posted prior to October. So again, next month, we're going to be rolling out the integrated monitoring, sustaining compliance and improvement protocols. And then that most likely will be followed by either dispute resolution or data. We're still working that out. So any other questions? I don't see any hand raises, I don't think. Okay, one more question for you, Matt. Does the
Yep.
extra 120 days for SEAs to liquidate funds apply to just the FFY21 funds or ARP funds or all IDA funds?
It applies to all your funds that that are currently active and moving forward. So it's not specific to ARP. It came out before the American Rescue Plan. It's part of the uniform guidance change. And just to be clear, it's not an extra 120 days. It's actually an extra 30 days, expanding from 90 days to 120 days.
Great, good clarification. Any other questions? You can either raise your hand or type them in the question box. Let me see, I don't see any hand raises. All right, well, I think we've covered a lot on today's call. We want to thank everyone for being with us today. We hope you have a good holiday weekend, and we'll see you again at the end of next month for our Universal DMS call. And then the National TA call is the second Thursday, right, Diana?
Yes, June 10th.
Okay, June 10th, thank you. So thank you everyone for being on with us today, and we'll be talking to you soon. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.